Is the zit even that visible? Perhaps not. That angle makes it visible, so there you can see it. But I think if I'm back here... Oh, no, yeah, you can see it. Hi, everyone. At the start of this video, I just want to address something. Yes, I got a pimple on my nose. It's right here. It's fine. We're all adults here. I'm an adult who has to film myself to make videos, but we're all adults. Let's be adults. I'll make a little joke about it first here. Today we're doing an Orzhov deck that's white and black. You might be asking, Phil, don't you mean red and blue? 'Cause is it? Okay, now we can put that to bed. And speaking of putting things to bed, what if you wanted to build a deck themed around bedtime stories, fairy tales, myths, and sleeping? Well, you'd probably want to build something around Neva, Stalked by Nightmares from Wilds of Eldraine. But then you would read her text box and you would be like, that sucks. Folks, this is a commander deck that purely exists because I don't like being told I can't do something. There is no better way to motivate me to do something than to tell me that it cannot be done. Wilds of Eldraine was the first set that came out that was new when I started playing Magic the Gathering, so it's got a special place in my heart, and I thought, you know, I'd really love to build a bunch of commanders from this set. And Neva is the worst, probably. Especially according to my girlfriend, who is the one who got me into Magic, and she was like, yeah, this thing's trash. So let's talk about the trash. First, costs 4 mana for a 2/2. Off to a bad start. She's got Menace, that's fun, means she's got to be blocked by 2 or more creatures, and when she enters the battlefield, you return a creature card or an enchantment card from the graveyard to your hand. So if you spent something early, you can get it back when you cast your commander. Not bad, not great, not really even good, considering, you know, you probably want her out on turn 3 or 4 at the latest, but whatever. The real kicker here is that whenever an enchantment you control goes into the graveyard from the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Neva and scry 1. And that's it. Putting enchantments in the graveyard is kind of tricky. It's not as easy as sacrificing creatures in Orzhov. It's not as easy as sacrificing permanents if you could count treasures or you could count other tokens. No, you need to specifically be putting enchantments in your bin, and every enchantment only gets her up by 1 and gives you a scry. Okay, so what's the idea behind this card? Why does it even exist the way it does? Well, I think it's because of rolls, which were also introduced in Wilds of Eldraine, specifically the wickedly talented Wicked roll, not Adele Dazeem. Rolls are aura tokens that go onto your creatures and affect them in some way. The Wicked roll specifically gives them +1/+1, and when that aura is put into a graveyard, every opponent loses 1 life. So if they ever return to Eldraine a 3rd time and add in enough support that you can regularly make Wicked roll tokens, this would be great. However, as it currently stands, there's not really a good way to generate a lot of Wicked roll tokens, and you would still need to generate creatures to sacrifice that had those Wicked roll tokens to die to get the activation of the aura, or I guess find other ways to sacrifice auras, which there isn't really a whole lot to specifically sacrifice enchantments. But actually, there is. We'll talk about that a bit later. So if she doesn't work with the mechanic she's supposed to work with within the set, how do you make Neva a decent commander that's functional? You tell a story. Sagas are a special type of enchantment that usually has between 2 or 5 chapters. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 that have 6, but it's usually between 2 and 5. Even 5 is pushing it. When you play them, the first chapter happens, and then on following turns after your draw step, the story continues and you move on to the next chapter of the saga. Once the saga is complete and you have hit the last chapter of the saga, you sacrifice the saga and it goes into your graveyard. And that is how we are triggering Neva. But how are we triggering our late night snacks with today's sponsor, Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service that sends you meals that are fresh and never frozen and ready to eat in 2 minutes. You just gotta pop them in the microwave and you're good to go. That leaves you plenty of extra time to build decks, shuffle those decks, shuffle them up so good God you hit a land drop. And these food tokens heal more than 3 life. I don't know what actually the equivalent of life in Magic the Gathering to life in real life is, But regardless of your dietary restrictions, Factor's got you covered. Calorie smart options, keto options, vegetarian and vegan options. The menu is huge. You can pick what you like. You can just pick what flavors you like too. Though, I love using Factor as a way to figure out new flavors I like because I've never had a bad Factor meal. Every Factor meal I have eaten has been delicious, and it has turned me on to some foods that were missing from my diet. Polenta. Never had it. Now I want to have it plenty. Factor is also great at supplying you with snacks for a game of Commander. They got small bites. They got juices. They've got breakfast for you if you want breakfast. Personally, sometimes I like to have a little second breakfast because I'm very hobbit-pilled. No, I'm not. I'm too tall. I'm a hungry boy. And as a hungry boy, I love Factor. Folks, I've been trying to go to a bunch of conventions this year, and Factor's flexibility has been a big help, letting me change the amount of meals I get per week, or just rescheduling and changing the delivery day to a time when I'll be home. To get started today, go to factor75.com and enter offer code 50hardly at checkout for 50% off your first Factor box and free shipping. Again, that is factor75.com and offer code 50hardly at checkout, as in Commander I hardly know, for 50% off your first Factor box and free shipping. Now let's figure out how this Commander will put your opponents to sleep. If you want enchantments to be put in the graveyard, you need a lot of enchantments in the deck, and that's why we have 27 of them. First, the Sagas, since that's the main kick of the deck. Birth of Meletus is a way to tutor up a land. The first chapter of it lets you grab a Plains card, the second chapter builds you a wall, and the third chapter gains you some life. There's actually quite a bit of life gain in this deck. I thought about putting life gain payoffs in just because of how much incidental life gain you end up getting, but I decided against it. That's not how you're gonna win. You're gonna win by hitting people with Sleepy Snow White, who woke up. That's right. Snow White went woke. Snow White went woke. The Witch's Vanity destroys a creature with mana value 2 or less. Since this is a 2-drop, it's an easy way to destroy Elvish Mystics or other early game dorks that need to get blown up to slow your opponents down. Then you make a food token, and then you make a Wicked Roll token. There are still Wicked Rolls in this deck, it's just there isn't a good way to consistently generate the wickedly talented roll tokens. The Triumph of Gerald puts a +1/+1 counter on the creature you control with the most power. Hopefully that's Neva, and she gets bigger and then hits harder. That's the first 2 chapters, and then the final chapter gives the creature you control with the most power flying, first strike, and lifelink, making her a great big old body to swing on in, and also gain you some more life. Again, lots of life gain in this deck. You don't have to worry about people swinging at you, other than commander damage. Ascent of the Worthy lets you choose a creature you control, and then until the beginning of your next turn, anytime one of your creatures would take damage, that creature takes damage instead. Later, we're going to have enchantment creatures, which are also enchantments that can leave the battlefield. So, I'll talk about one now. Spirited Companion. It's a 2-drop. It draws you a card when it enters, but it's an enchantment creature. So you choose this good boy to be your chosen, then it'll probably die. But that's fine, because Part 3 returns a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And now it's an angel. In the case of Spirited Companion, I think it already was. Braids' Frightful Return lets you choose to sacrifice a creature. If you do, each opponent discards a card. Part 2 is you return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And Part 3 has target opponent sacrifice a non-land, non-token permanent. If they don't, they lose 2 life, and you draw a card. Incidentally, this also has Read Ahead, which is a keyword specific to Sagas, letting you choose what chapter it comes in on. So if you just want to hit someone with that you have to sacrifice something, you can just start the enchantment there. That would also instantly sacrifice the enchantment and instantly boost Neva, and have you scry so you can look ahead in your deck. Scrying is looking at the top card of your library. Oh my god, have I never talked about scrying on this channel before? Oh my god. Well, there you go. That's what scrying is. You look at the top card of your library. If you don't like it, you can put it on the bottom. You can use this is to make sure that your next card draw is going to be another saga, another bedtime story to be told. Yeah, I probably should tell people why the commander's good. Like, what does it? Fall of the First Civilization, more like Fall of the card game I love, because this is Assassin's Creed. And I know that because I actually don't you could play this and no one would know it was Assassin's Creed. You and target opponent each draw 2 cards on the first chapter of this spell. Then you exile an artifact an opponent controls, like a soul ring or an arcane signet or something actually serious if it's later in the game and they have a scary artifact that's bad. Then part 3, each player chooses 3 non-land permanents they control and sacrifices the rest. This is also a great way for you to blow up your own enchantments and make Neva bigger. This deck is replete with board wipes, but board wipes that don't hit Neva, because Neva needs to stay. She needs to swing. She needs to swing. I guess I really know how she's fallen asleep. Boing. I don't think she's a swinger. 4 Nox is from Doctor Who, not from Nevada. It has Vanishing 4, which means that at the beginning of each upkeep, you remove a time counter from it, and then once it hits 0, you have to sacrifice it, which is great. It's not actually a Saga, but it kind of goes away in the same way a Saga does. While it's out, though, you get to draw an extra card at the start of every turn. And drawing cards is good. You want to do that. Love Song of the Night and Day is similar to the Fall of the First Civilization, except actually other way around, because this card's older. You and another opponent draw 2 cards. You get to choose the opponent. It's good politics. Then you make a bird. Then you put a +1/+1 counter on 2 target creatures. Probably choose Neva, and then you sacrifice this thing because it hit its last chapter, and that's another +1/+1. So she gets bigger. The Creation of Avacyn is the first of a few different Saga tutors. Tutors, for those who don't know, are cards that let you go through your deck, pick one you like, and use it. And that's pretty good in Commander. That's pretty good in any format, but especially in Commander where you've got 100 cards to choose from. So what this one does, you choose a card of your choice and you slap it down on the battlefield face down. Part 2, you flip that card over, and if it's a creature card, you lose life equal to that creature card's mana value. If it's not a creature card, you don't. Part 3, if it's a creature card, you get to play it without paying its mana cost. If it's not a creature card, you put it into your hand. This is great at finding so many different creatures that work so well with so many sagas and enchantments. We'll talk about the creatures later. Those are extra fun things. 3 Blind Mice is my favorite card in this deck. 3 Blind Mice might be my favorite card. We won't quite talk about why just yet. First, I'm going to say what it does on a basic level. First time it comes in, you make a 1/1 mouse. This was actually one of the first ways you could get mouse as a creature type in Magic the Gathering, because Eldraine, specifically Eldraine 2, Eldraine Boogaloo, was the set that introduced mice. And then Bloomborough came and made mice an actual archetype, but this is the first place you could get mice. Isn't that weird? I guess because they had rats, and they were like, well, rats and mice are the same thing. But rats and mice get to be distinct, except every bird is a bird. Owls, eagles, penguins, all birds, but mice and rats, let's make a distinction. Oh, and squirrels. Oh, and hamsters. Yeah, we couldn't say those are the same thing. No, but every bird? Sorry, I have opinions about birds. I'm sorry, a raven? We're saying a raven and a falcon. That's the same creature archetype. Okay. Anyway, part 2 of this is you make a copy of a token you control. Part 3 of this is you make a copy of a token you control. It's the same thing twice. And then part 4, creatures you control get +1/+1 and vigilance until end of turn. It's pretty neat. Gets you 3 mice and then they get bigger. For now. We'll talk about it later. And why this is my favorite win con. This is one of the win cons of the deck. It's fun. Trial of the Time Lord is a Doctor Who one. I mean, this one's pretty obviously a Doctor Who one because it's got Time Lord in the name. So yeah, no universes beyond hiding there. But it's targeted removal. You get to choose a creature to exile until this leaves the battlefield. But on part 4, everybody gets to vote whether or not the creature is exiled with this card to go to the bottom of their owner's library or go back to the board. If you fully bully one person with this, everyone's going to vote to agree to keep bullying. Because despite Magic the Gathering being a community of nerds, a lot of us kind of want to be the bullies now. Chainer's Torment is risky Magic, but it's also cool, epic, badass Magic. The first 2 chapters have you gaining 2 life while each opponent loses 2 life. The last chapter has you make a Nightmare token with power toughness equal to half your life total, because you also lost half your life total. A lot of times this will make like a 20/20 token, and this isn't even what I was talking about with 3 Blind Mice. But if you bring 3 Blind Mice out after you have that 20/20 token, that 20/20 token doesn't do 20 damage to you again. You just get another 20/20 token. and then you've just got big old nightmare tokens that are a nightmare for your opponents. Not even what I was talking about, but just another great thing that 3 blind mice can do. Death in Heaven, parts 1 and 2, target player mills 2 cards and exiles their graveyard. Then on number 3, you take all the creatures exiled with this card, and you make them 2/2 Cybermen. It messes with graveyard reanimator decks and also makes you a wide board of tokens. Friels Rit. I don't know how to do a Norwegian accent. Frige's Retribution. I'm not even going to try and say it right. Makes a 4/4 Angel Warrior token. Part 2 lets you tap angels you control to destroy creatures with power toughness less than theirs. And then part 3 gives angels you control double strike until end of turn. Angels are good tokens. I don't know if you've noticed, we are kind of making a lot of tokens, and that is what sort of ends up being the strategy of this deck to win. Quite frankly, this is just a good stuff Sagas deck where I just picked the best Sagas in Orzhov and put them in with this commander, but I've playtested the deck and yeah, it works. Good stuff Sagas works. One of the ways good stuff Sagas works is you make a big wide army of tokens, and those tokens swing in to win you the game. One ring to rule them all tempts you with the ring. God, do I have to explain ring tempting? I don't want to, because every time I get tempted by the ring when I'm playing a game, I look up the rules, and I've playtested this deck a couple dozen times, and I have played other decks that have the ring tempts you cards, and I'm like, what the fuck does that do every single time? So, yeah, it doesn't matter. Then, everybody mills cards equal to your ring bearer's power, which is just, whatever creature you chose to be your ring bearer. Part 2 is you destroy all non-legendary creatures. Now, this is a way you can save a non-legendary creature if you want to. One of the first things the ring tempting you does is it makes a creature legendary if it wasn't. So if you have something on the board that is a non-legendary creature and you want to keep it after part 2, declare that to be your ring bearer. Don't automatically say, I want my commander to be the ring bearer. Important note. Part 3, each opponent loses 1 life for each creature card in their graveyard. Again, this is more hate to the reanimator decks or the mill decks that are putting their whole libraries in their graveyard. Hey, knock it off. War of the Last Alliance is another tutor. This one lets you find a legendary creature card and put it into your hand for the first 2 options. And then part 3, creatures you control get double strike until end of turn. And the ring tempts you. What? Yeah, whatever that does. The Eldest Reborn has each opponent sacrifice a creature and or planeswalker. I don't know why I said and or, it's just or. And or on Disney Plus. They didn't sponsor us. I'm just telling you where it is. Part 2, each opponent discards a card. And part 3 has you taking a creature card from a graveyard and putting it on the battlefield under your control. Does not have to be from your graveyard, so you can steal something good that someone else had to get rid of. Genesis of the Daleks. It's another win con, baby. Part 1, you make a Dalek. Part 2, you make 2 Daleks. Part 3, you make 3 Daleks. They're all 3 3s with Menacci, which is the Italian way to say menace. Part 4, an opponent of your choice makes a villainous choice. They have to choose whether or not to blow up the board and destroy all creatures that are not Daleks, or destroy all Daleks. But then, every opponent takes damage equal to the total power among Daleks you controlled. 1 + 2 + 3 is 6. 6 times the 3 power of the Daleks is 18 damage. Now, if only we had a way to make duplicates of tokens. Oh wait, it's 3 blind mice. You can make more Daleks by making tokens that are copies of Daleks. And then that 18 goes to 21 the first time, then 24, and then you just keep going and going and going and going. Ideally forever. Oh wait. I haven't told you about forever yet. I'll tell you about forever in a little bit. Why not right now? There are plenty of creatures in Magic the Gathering that make enchantments go better, and they're a core part of any Enchantress deck. But there are also creatures that make specifically Sagas better, because Sagas got support in Doctor Who. God bless that British man. Barbara Wright gives all the Sagas you control read ahead. You remember what that does from Braids' Frightful Return. That lets you just pick where your Sagas start. So if you just want to supercharge Neva and have her swinging big as fast as possible, start reading books at the last chapter. And then get mad about spoilers. Ian Chesterton gives sagas you control replicate, which means you can pay the saga's mana value in order to make a second copy of that saga, a token copy of that saga. And now I'm gonna tell you about why 3 Blind Mice is my favorite win con for this deck. So, part 2 and 3 of 3 Blind Mice make tokens that are copies of a token you control. So if you pay the replicate cost for 3 Blind Mice, you have 2 3 Blind Mice. One of those mice is a token, which means that you can use part 2 and 3 when this advances to 2. If you have those 2 tokens that enter at the same time, you've got 2 entering the second chapter, and those can copy the token of 3 Blind Mice, giving you 2 more copies of 3 Blind Mice at level 1, while you have 2 that are at level 2. But the next turn, because part 3 of 3 Blind Mice also makes a copy of a token, you have 4 3 Blind Mice that are making token copies of tokens. Every token copy of a saga will start at 1, which means that you will now have 4 copies of 3 Blind Mice at level 1, and you will have 2 copies of 3 Blind Mice at level 2, and 2 copies of 3 Blind Mice at level 3. But next turn, you'll have 2 3 Blind Mice at level 4. Getting it done, it's deleted, but you'll have 2 and 4 that are copying tokens, which means you make 6 tokens of 3 Blind Mice. And then it's 10, and then it's 16, and then you just keep going and going and going and going and going until you have an infinite number of mice. And you have an infinite number of 3 Blind Mice making copies of 3 Blind Mice that are making you more mice. And when each of those hits the bottom and they get to the part where they're sacrificed, every creature gets +1/+1 for each 3 Blind Mice that blew up. So you just make so many mice. Welcome to the mouse factory. We make mice here. Or another thing we could do, we could make copies of Wicked Roll tokens once we have enough 3 Blind Mice tokens. We could make copies of other sagas we replicate, like the sagas that make people discard cards after you sacrifice a creature. Braids Frightful Return. Oh, but I have to sacrifice a creature for each copy of that to make people discard a card. You have unlimited mice that you could throw into the meat grinder that is Braids Frightful Return. So your opponents don't get to have hands anymore. They only get to have 1 card that they draw on their draw step. And that card has to take care of every 3 Blind Mice. You need something that says destroy all enchantments. I'm not saying that card doesn't exist. I'm saying the odds that someone's going to top deck that, someone's going to get your farewells, rare. A lot of enchantment removal is I'm going to destroy an enchantment. It's not going to destroy every enchantment, which means you win with the mice.
This is how I win.
It's my favorite win con in the deck. It's my favorite win con in the deck. So, more benefits to more sagas. Perry Brown gives the first historic spell you cast each turn convoke. Sagas are historic. Artifacts are also historic, as are legendary creatures. Those are the things that are historic. If you have a bunch of mice or other tokens, because again, a lot of the other sagas make tokens as well, it's a great way to cast spells for cheap. Romana, more like Romana, I haven't seen Doctor Who, but she's got vigilance, and you can tap her and pay 1 mana to make a copy of a token that entered the battlefield under your control. Now, is this here just for 3 Blind Mice? No. Is it here mostly because of 3 Blind Mice? Yeah, but remember, there's a ton of other token support in here. You've got that Nightmare token you can make a copy of. You've got 4/4 Angels you can make token copies of. There's a lot of tokens that could happen. Wicked Roll tokens, food tokens. There's a lot of tokens that can happen. She is not just here for 3 Blind Mice. I would never put a card in a deck because 1 other card works well with it. I would put a card in a deck if 1 card works really, really well with it, and then other cards work pretty okay with it, but I would never do it just for 1 card. Carmen Cruel Skymarcher, deceptively, you might think is just for Orzhov's sacrifice deck. She's got flying. Whenever anybody sacrifices a permanent, you put a +1/+1 counter on her, and when she attacks, you put a permanent card from your graveyard onto the battlefield with mana value less than her power. This can get lands. That's an interesting tech piece. It also works really good in Orzhov Sagas because you sacrifice the Sagas when they die. And then when she attacks, the Sagas come back and you can read the same story again. You might think, why would I reread the same story over and over again? Well, have you ever had a kid and had to read them a bedtime story? They don't want new stuff. They want the same one again. They like that one. They know they like that one. You don't have to mix it up. And apparently Carmen loves telling bedtime stories. She is actually a sweetheart. I know she looks very violent. And her name has cruel in the title. Undo Spirit Dancer, more like don't mind if I do Spirit Dancer, because this makes a copy of an enchantment you cast once per turn. This is a great way to enable 3 blind mice, but remember, I'm not putting in cards just because they make 1 card good. You know what other saga is good when you have 2 of them? All of them. All of the enchantments. Speaking of, we actually weren't done talking about enchantments. I just wanted to take a brief creature supporting specifically Sagas break. But there are other enchantments that are kind of easy to put in the bin, or that are just so valuable to an Enchantress deck that they're worth it because we have so many enchantments in this deck. Hopeless Nightmare, it's a great turn 1 play. We had it in Zoyawa. That makes each opponent discard a card and lose 2 life. It's a 1-drop, and then you can pay 3 to blow it up, which is something that Neva wants to do. Also, when it hits the graveyard, you get to scry 2, which with Neva basically means you scry 3. I know it's not technically scrying 3, but like it kind of is. So like, I don't know, just shut up. Kaya's Ghost form is how we're protecting Neva. We've got a few different forms of protection for Neva that aren't maybe as good, but they're more on brand. Kaya's Ghost form is an aura. Whenever the creature who is aura'd up with it dies, you return them to the battlefield. It also works if they're exiled, so Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares don't matter. Kaya's Ghost form will give you the protection. Soul Snare lets you pay 1 mana to sacrifice it and exile a creature that's attacking you or a planeswalker you control. We don't have any planeswalkers in this deck for once. All That Glitters is just a win con. It just makes Neva bigger. It gives a creature +1/+1 for each aura and artifact you control. Frankly, you're going to have an absurd amount of enchantments. And frankly, you also have an absurd amount of artifacts. Food tokens get made left and right here. Wall tokens are artifacts. Treasures are artifacts. There's a lot of deceptive artifacts happening in here that will boost her up even more. Angelic Renewal lets you sacrifice it when a creature you control is put into the graveyard to return that creature to the battlefield. If you hit Neva with it, you get to put an enchantment back in your hand as well, because that's another thing she does. It's not just the scrying thing. Fungal Fortitude, it's kind of like Kaya's Ghost form, doesn't work for exile. It also has flash though, so you can use this if someone is hitting Neva right away. It also gives her +2/+0, which means that she hits harder, which is neat. Lord Skitter's Blessing creates a wicked token attached to a creature you control, and as long as you control an enchanted creature, at the beginning of your draw step, you get to draw an extra card and lose 1 life. Yeah, losing 1 life. Boo-hoo. Remember how much life gain this deck has? You'll be fine. Sigil of the Empty Throne gives you a 4/4 flying angel every time you cast an enchantment spell. This isn't specifically when an enchantment enters, so if you get tokens that are copies of the enchantments you cast, you still only get 1 4/4 angel. But you get 1 4/4 angel every enchantment, and this deck has 27 enchantments in it, which is 26 other enchantments. And actually, no wait, I forgot, we have 2 enchantment lands. So it has 28 enchantments that you could hit on this if this is your first enchantment, which it won't be, but like you get what I'm saying. So hey, let's talk about those enchantment lands. Valgavoth's Lair is just an enchantment land with hexproof, so your opponents can't blow it up. It enters tapped. You can choose if you want it to be white, you want it to be black, whichever one you need depending on the other lands in your hand. And then Urza's Saga. It's a saga. It's a really expensive card to put in this deck, but it's a saga and it's a land. Part 1, you can tap it for a colorless mana. Part 2, you can pay 2 mana to make an Urza construct, which is a construct that gets +1/+1 for the other artifacts you control, or the total artifacts you control, not other. It's so easy to misspeak a little bit when I'm just reading card rules, so please be patient with me, and also do not take any of the cards that I am reading or saying 100% accurately. You have to read them. Part 3, you sack this and tutor up an artifact that costs 1 or less. The only one this deck has is Soul Ring, but it's also an enchantment that can blow up really easily and give Neva more power and get you a Soul Ring, which is ramp. Hall of Helion's Generosity is another utility land in here. It lets you pay 1 and a white to put an enchantment in your graveyard onto the top of your deck so that it's the next card you draw. Great way to get your sagas back if you have a saga you want to run again. Another great way to get sagas back is Court of Arden Vale. This is an enchantment that makes you the monarch, meaning you get to draw at the beginning of your end step until someone hits you, and then they become the monarch. It just puts the monarch in the game, and I like the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you are still the monarch, you get to take a permanent from your graveyard with mana value 4 or less, put it onto the battlefield under your control. If you are not the monarch, you put it into your hand, but that is still great recursion considering most of these sagas cost 4 or less. It is so worth it to have this in the deck, and it is the thing I tutor most for. Speaking of tutors, we actually put some tutors in here. Enlightened Tutor lets you tutor up an artifact or an enchantment. Put it on the top of your library. It's a great spell to cast on the first turn if you have it in your opening hand, so you know what kind of saga you're going to start telling. Beseech the Mirror is a lot more expensive, but it can also put things directly onto the battlefield. This costs 3 black and 1 colorless, but it has the bargain mechanic, letting you sacrifice an artifact, token, or enchantment to get a better version of the spell. The normal of the version of the spell has you tutoring up something 4 or less and putting it into your hand, but if you bargained, you just get to slap that sucker onto the battlefield. Court of Ardenvale is my favorite thing to hit with. But maybe you want to do something else. I don't know. Live your life. Bargains are a great way to start destroying your sagas early if you're just trying to bump Neva up, which is why we also have Archon's Glory, which gives a creature +2/+2 until end of turn, but if you bargain it and sacrifice something, you also get Flying and Lifelink, which is great. Flying is more evasion. Flying and Menace means they need 2 flying blockers to block Neva, which you'll probably get in to do that sweet commander damage. Rowan's Grim Search lets you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, but if you bargain it, you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library and put 2 of them into your graveyard before you draw those 2 cards. So you draw 2 better cards, probably. You can also put something in the graveyard, and then if you cast Neva later, you can get that card back. Ideally, you would be casting this after you have Neva out, but it still kind of works either way. Break the Spell is not technically a bargain spell, but I think it's a bargain spell. It destroys target enchantment at instant speed, and if you controlled the permanent destroyed this way, you get to draw a card, which means that you could hit your own enchantment after it hits its own sacrifice level, and then draw a card off of it instead of just scrying, although actually you would scry and draw a card, which is pretty great. It's also removal if other people have problematic enchantments like Smothering Tide or Rhystic Study. We've got some enchantment creatures. Doomwake Giant gives creatures your opponents control -1/-1 every time an enchantment enters during a turn. Specifically an enchantment you control. I misspoke there a little bit, but if you can cast 3 or 4 enchantments in a turn, you know, some of those small ones, that's a board wipe. A board wipe that gets around indestructibility. I like that. Demon of Fate's Design has flying and trample. It's an enchantment creature. It's a 6/6. It lets you pay life to cast enchantment spells once per turn, and you can pay to sacrifice an enchantment and then give this big boy +X/+O, where X is that spell's mana value. So it's a great way to sacrifice enchantments. It's a great big body. It's a great way to use the extra life you get from the life gain. And it's just a great card in this deck. Elysiad of Life's Bounty lets you pay 1 to sacrifice it and give a creature or enchantment you control protection from a color of your choice. Since you can do this at instant speed, you can use it to stop something that would remove your commander or would remove an enchantment that you've become quite fond of. People might try and blow up Genesis of the Daleks, for example. Which, by the way, I guess we should talk about. A big weakness of Sagas is they are way too honest about what you're trying to do. You throw it down on the board and everyone can see what you're hoping happens for the next 3 turns, the next 4 turns, the next 2 turns, whatever it is. You're kind of tipping them off. You're saying, this is my story, this is my game plan, handle it. And it does give them the opportunity to handle it. Obviously, I think that the value you get out of them effectively being 3 or 4 spells for the cost of 1 spell, pretty good, and I think it makes them interesting, and also I think people kind of sleep on them, because usually a saga is good because of a collection of things. It's good in the whole. It's not good on the individual step, and I think the commander brain, the commander player brain specifically, is more against 1 step being bad, right? So since 1 step is never that bad, they sort of let you get all of the value out of all of the saga, in my experience. Your experience may vary. Finally, we've just got some classic Enchantress staples. Enchantress, for those who don't know, is an archetype where you cast enchantment spells. That's it. That's what Enchantress is as an archetype. This is specifically Saga Enchantress. Optimistic Scavenger lets you put a +1/+1 whenever an enchantment enters, or a room opens. We're not doing rooms. There are no rooms in this deck. Warehouse Tabby. When an enchantment leaves the battlefield, you make a 1/1 rat. That's a token you can sacrifice. It's also another token. Knight of Doves is the same thing, but for birds. Birds have flying, so it's better, but it costs more mana. Ashiok's Reaper lets you draw a card when an enchantment goes into the graveyard. Your tokens do go into the graveyard, they just don't count as cards, which is a weird distinction we had to make with Zoyawa, because that was specifically looking for Descend triggers, which are cards going into your graveyard. This works with tokens. Grim Guardian makes your opponents lose 1 life when an enchantment enters under your control. Underworld Coinsmith gains you 1 life when an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. Mesa Enchantress has you drawing a card when an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. Starfield Mystic discounts your enchantment spells by 1 colorless mana. Also, you put a +1/+1 counter on him whenever an enchantment leaves the battlefield, making him particularly great for Sagas. Starnheim Courser, great flying blocker, but also artifact and enchantment spells cost you 1 less. Auramancer brings an enchantment back into your hand from the graveyard when it enters. It's basically a lesser Neva. But how could I have gone so long without talking about the undisputed GOAT of this deck, Faith Healer? Faith Healer lets you sacrifice an enchantment to gain life equal to the mana value. Again, life gain, not actually the main strategy of this deck, but having a trigger. This is essentially Viscera Seer for enchantments in a deck that is trying to aristocrats its enchantments. Faith Healer makes Neva so much better. Additionally, because of how rules of sagas work, you can absolutely hit the final chapter of a saga, get the benefit of it, then say, I'm going to sacrifice my saga to the Faith Healer, and you get to heal that life value. Yes, you do sacrifice the thing, and it's technically not being sacrificed. It's stupid, like the actual way it works, but if you don't care about the who's-y what's-its of the rules or how it works, you get the benefit of the last chapter, you get the benefit of the life gain, and now every time a saga reaches its conclusion, you also just gain like 3 life or 4 life or 5 life. I know life isn't as important in Commander, but it's not bad. And if you plan on doing Chainer's Torment later and getting a creature with half of your life total, fuck it, have some life. All right, this is the part in the video where I literally just go through the deck list and I'm like, who didn't I talk about? Braids, Arisen Nightmare, a card I got a little wrong in Zoyawa. I'm so sorry. So in Zoyawa, basically you have to have descended before your end step for Zoyawa's thing to trigger. So I was wrong. I still stand by having Braids in the deck because it still messes up other people's boards. Anyway, Braids Arisen Nightmare, for those who didn't see that video, lets you choose to sacrifice an enchantment, land, artifact, or creature at the beginning of your end step. For each opponent who doesn't do the same, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. Now, this is really good in Neva because enchantment is probably the type of permanent people are least likely to sacrifice. Not because they don't want to sacrifice it, but mostly because unless you're playing Enchantress, you probably only have 3 or 4 enchantment cards in the entirety of your deck. So yeah, a lot of people aren't going to be able to hit that. They're going to lose life. You're going to sacrifice an enchantment, making Neva bigger, letting you scry, and then you're going to draw a card, which means more card draw at the end of your turn. This deck draws a ton of cards, and drawing cards is such a great way to win because it makes sure you always have something to play, and it makes sure you always hit your land drops. Braids, great card in this deck. So, how do you win with the deck? Well, you get Neva big and you deal some commander damage with the Menace. Or you make a big old battlefield full of tokens and you just hit your opponents with those tokens. Or you burn out their life total with something like Genesis of the Daleks. Or you make an infinite number of 3 blind mice and then you just have a billion rats destroy things. Not rats, mice. They're different. I talked about that. There's a lot of different weird ways you can win in this deck, and when I've playtested it, it hits a win con. It might not hit the same win con every time, so it's not consistent. But the W's are fairly consistent, even if the way you get the W isn't. This is Orzhov Saga's good stuff, and it works. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, subscribe for more. We're talking about weirdo commanders all the time. Join the Patreon if you want to support the channel. It's the best place to do it. Thanks to Cade for editing this video. I said he's sponsored the last one. That's not true. He gets paid to do this because he does a great job. Finally, check out Tulok and Mango if you want to watch us play video games, and follow me on Twitch at Tulok the Barbarian if you want to watch me play games live and pick my brain about these decks live. Bye-bye.